G'day legends, I hope that you're having a fantastic day and so far a fantastic start to your week. Now today, as always, we do have a lot to go over, and I know these videos get long, but I just feel like there's so much information and nuance to add to so many of these topics. So I apologize, maybe watch every second one. I don't know what the solution is here, but of course, we have a lot to go over today. We need to look at the maps. We need to look at where things are moving and line that up with some geolocated footage, as we always do. And of course, a comparison of different maps with different sources. Now, there has been some good news for Ukraine. Of course, today, through New York Times, it looks like the American administration, through President Biden, has given Ukraine permission for the use of ATACMS, these longer range missiles, back into Russian territory. So we're going to go over that. We're going to look at what benefit will this give Ukraine, the front line, what effect will it have on Russia, and how the North Korean deployment all mixes into this. Like I've been saying, with a figure of 10,000 North Koreans who don't speak Russian, who have no combat experience, who have questionable training, even questionable nutrition, how much difference is that going to make when Russia already has 1 million other soldiers? What I've been saying is this deployment, the narrative that we see of they're deploying, they're being killed, they're this, to that, I see is going to have more effect for Ukraine positively in, like I've said, potential policy shift as use these weapons, then it will have battlefield tactical effect for Russia, adding 1% or less more soldiers who don't speak the language, have never worked with their forces. So we'll look at how that has been sold and how that can affect this also. But what we're going to start with, so we're going to look at longer range strikes, both from Russia and Ukraine, but where we're going to start is the long range missile strikes and drone strikes that Russia launched against Ukraine yesterday. Now, we have been waiting for some time saying there's likely to be a large Russian missile attack. And what we've been reporting is it's not that Russia is out of missiles. Everyone knows they ran out in 2022 and the Tu-22s were firing spades and shovels, knives and forks since then, but that they were stockpiling these for very large missile attacks, like we saw last night, being one of the largest strikes throughout this war. And I do think we will see more of these targeting Ukraine's critical infrastructure as the temperatures plummet and we head into the colder months. Like I've said many times, it is always impossible to tell the effect, the battlefield effect of these strikes. Ukraine has made it illegal to film any strikes, so is Russia on the other side. And if you are at this point believing the Russian and Ukrainian numbers, whether it be missile strikes, interceptions, casualties, maybe you're on the wrong channel. I question all of the figures coming out in this, as we can see, where propaganda has its own peaks and troughs and how that is affected by frontline actions. But let's begin on these strikes. So it was a massive missile attack overnight. Now, Russian pages are saying that all of these reached their targets. Ukrainian pages are saying that the majority have been intercepted. So from the Ukrainian Air Force, reported through Noel reports here, we have 120 missiles, 90 drones. But as you can see by this, the vast majority have been intercepted or hit by electronic warfare. And the thing is, it's impossible to confirm or deny these numbers because we just don't get the information that we would need to have any confirmation of these. But you can see that the Kaliber, the KH-101s, had the most success out of the missiles by at least their figures, but saying that the Zircon and the Kinzhals by 100% or very high percents are being intercepted as well, which I know many question. But these were targeting primarily critical infrastructure, energy facilities. Again, energy facilities, these are dual use. They are considered dual use. You can target these in a war, just like Ukraine can target Russia's energy producing facilities too, because they're used by military infrastructure. They're also used by civilians, but under the laws of armed conflict, this deems these then dual use. So we do have some footage of these. So this is Rivne right up here. So in the northwest of Ukraine. You can see where Lviv is here. Of course, the front line is somewhere down where my cursor is at the moment. And this is where we get multiple of these KH-101s having successful strikes on a substation, electricity substation here. So you can see there has been at least one, maybe two strikes, and we see one of these cruise missiles. What you can see, which is something we've seen in the last 6 months, is a deployment here, I believe, of a countermeasure from that. We have seen them releasing their own flares and potentially chaff to get around the air defences. So you can see a strike against the substation here, and then these are birds, by the way, and then you will see a second strike into the substation here, and I don't think we have another one. Anyway, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky, he has said that at least 10 air targets were taken down by F-16s. We have also at Kremenchuk hydro power plant here that this dam wall has been struck as well by cruise missiles. Now, there's an interesting piece in here. So we see this first one miss here. So that's a miss on this dam. And then one of the funny things is we see the second one miss almost in the exact same spot right there as well, whether it's been hit by EW or whether those were programmed slightly incorrect. It seems to have missed, but by the same amount on both missiles. I'm not sure. Someone could maybe fill me in on why that may occur, because you think if it was missing, it would miss by equal amounts somewhere else, but dead spot, it seems like the missile is accurate to that spot. It seems like the spot was wrong, or it's been hit by similar EW. I'm not sure, because if they were intercepted with a bullet had gone through it, they wouldn't hit in the same spot. Anyway, and then we do see then though here a third missile does strike right on the deck of this dam, causing the damage that we have shown you right there. And there is a lot of damage to Ukrainian infrastructure overnight also. So we see this is from the energy minister. There is mass attack on our energy system. The attacks objects of generation and transmission of electricity throughout Ukraine. The operator of the transmission system urgently reduced the mode of emergency power outages where possible. Rescuers and energy workers are already working on eliminating the consequences. So I do believe we will see a huge increase in the amount of strikes against infrastructure as the temperature cools. And of course, now that there has been the policy shift around Ukraine and long-range ATACMS strikes. This comes from the International Atomic Energy Agency, that they've had to reduce electricity production as a precautionary measure this morning following the widespread military activities. This is from the Director General. Although the nuclear power plants in here were not directly impacted and not shut down, several electrical substations on which they depend suffered further damage during the strike. So we know that several substations have definitely been hit because it's affected down the line. Like we've said, there's no need to strike the power plant itself. The amount of bang you need to get through that concrete and steel and reinforcements is unbelievable, and the political fallout of that would be immeasurable too. If you can just cut them off from the grid, it has the same effect. The main power lines from 4 of the substations were disconnected. At the moment, only 2 of the country's 9 operational reactors currently generate electricity at 100% capacity. At Rivne nuclear power plant, which is where we showed you before, 2 330 kilovolt power lines were unavailable. But all nuclear power plants still receive off-site power. Very important for the cooling. The country, by Ukraine's energy infrastructure, is extremely vulnerable. We are still assessing the full extent of the damage. So again, we are unsure. We mentioned those F-16s, which Zelensky is saying intercepted many targets, but there's also something else that some found interesting too, was the use of Tu-160 White Swan long-range strategic bombers. Now, AMK mapping here says, as I suspected, the Russian Tu-160s conducted a combat sortie during the latest missile attacks. They have never been used in the Ukraine war before. Sorry, I had to sneeze if there was a cut there. Now, this is not entirely correct. We believe that Russia has used these in 2022 and for some strikes throughout 2023, but it's correct as far as they're not used anywhere near as much as the Tu-95s or Tu-22s. Now, this is some level of analog to the B-1 bomber, but this is a strategic asset So there's far fewer numbers of these, and it's far more expensive and not needed at the moment. The capability that this adds, the Tu-22 and the Tu-95 doesn't have, is not needed at this point. It would just be significantly more expensive. And this is a breakdown of why Russia is using the backfire and the bear, of course, the Tu-22, the Tu-95, over the blackjack Tu-160. Am I right in white swan? Anyway, regardless, in Ukraine, it stems from the combination of operational, logistical, and strategic considerations. The Tu-22 and Tu-95 are way cheaper to operate compared to then the blackjack, and Russia has more of these. It's a very limited fleet of Tu-160s. Again, with anything, it's very difficult to get an idea on how many Russia has and how many are operational as well. Role and mission requirements. Tu-22, you can look at the use of the Kh-22 and Kh-32 missiles, which we have seen. The Tu-95, the Kh-101s, Kh-55s, where these are the missiles we most commonly see fired into Ukraine. The Tu-160 is capable of these missions, but it is optimized for long-range nuclear deterrence and global strategic strikes. Again, this can fill that capability gap, but it's more expensive, there's less of them, and they are not needed. Survivability concerns, that because these are still vulnerable to some of these assets, although it's way further off with the standoff missiles, they don't want to lose one of these. The operational tempo and readiness, the Tu-22, 95, these are older platforms, but are integrated into Russia's conventional strike doctrine. Tu-160 might require longer maintenance cycles due to its complexity and Russia's limited production capacity for spare parts, further limiting availability, although some of these are going through modernizations, just like the Tu-22 goes through modernizations as well. Preservation of strategic deterrence. Tu-160 is the centerpiece of Russia's nuclear triad. By limiting its use in Ukraine, Russia ensures its readiness for potential nuclear deterrence roles, which remain critical to its broader military strategy. In summary, the Tu-22, Tu-95s are more economical, available, and suited to the types of conventional missions Russia is conducting in Ukraine, while the Tu-160 is reserved for strategic priorities and higher stake scenarios, such as a war that were to spill over borders, if that were to become a reality. Now, some are saying that this is going to become a reality, and I do disagree with this, as we have seen the US sign off that long-range strikes are going to occur into Russia from ATACMS, and the UK and France have also said that their Storm Shadow or Scalp, they are the same system at the end of the day, will be used as well. You can see AusInt Defender reporting this here. One thing I'll say though is these were used a lot down in Crimea, used on the front line. We haven't seen these used for a long time, for months, at least in any large amount, and I believe that does really cry out that there is a very limited supply of these. This is why these countries are leading on Germany, wanting to fill that gap with the Taurus. As well as one thing we have seen is definitely, and we see this with all weapon systems, be it KH-101s, whether it be Storm Shadows, whether it be ATACMS, that the more that are fired in, the more zeroed in the air defenses get, therefore reducing the effectiveness of the system. This is why I think the ATACMS, this sign-off, why now by Biden, may actually be some level of strategic. There's going to be a lot to break down in this, but the next couple of months, they are still probably going to be highly effective against Russian targets in the territory, in Russian territory. So it will have the illusion of being very, very successful in those initial days, just like when any new system enters the battlefield, and then will reduce in effectiveness and numbers following that. But if there is to be some level of negotiation in that couple of months, you want that strike capability looking as successful as possible. So maybe it will still be on the up or not tapering back down. So the time frame in this, I think, is purposeful as well. It's not, Biden hasn't just woken up one morning and gone, let's do it today. I don't know, but I think it is a bit sickening that this could have been done years ago and would have been vastly more effective than now. This Twitter user goes, I don't know if they're just trying to cause a problem for Trump during his negotiations, but like I've said here, it puts potentially Ukraine in a better position than right now. But if it was done years ago and that had tapered off by now, we ended up here, it won't be as much at the negotiated process, potentially. So let's look at the response has been from some Russian pages, from Ukrainian pages, as well as some that are somewhat neutral, I guess, in the middle here. Now, this is the first thing that I want to break down. We see this from my Russian page here. Rest in peace to us all. We're about to get as close to all-out nuclear war more than ever before. Ukraine will be erased off the earth once the first American weapon is used on the Russian population. This is reckless from NATO, and they won't win. There are no winners. This last sentence, though, is why I believe that this is posturing in and defeats the rest of your three sentences before this, because the Kremlin, in my belief, is not going to use a nuclear weapon due to, well, there are no winners, because he'd be then sacrificing, he by Putin or the Kremlin would be sacrificing their own population due to ATACMS. This is not going to happen. The Kremlin is not going to end their own, the Russian Federation firing these weapons in due to ATACMS, which can go up to 300 kilometers, and as already we've been told from sources, are probably not going to have that much effect regardless. But Russia will only ever fire nuclear weapons if there is a threat to the existence of the Federation. Now, these weapons, the ATACMS, are far from this. You can put this in the propaganda basket that we looked at yesterday at why there may be an increase in this, and posturing, threatening, saber rattling to try and not have these or turn people, as you may see. And I'd say this week, this is going to be proven incorrect. If one is used, we've been hearing that they'll be used within a couple of days, and then there isn't and erased off the face of the earth, I think that'll be proven incorrect fairly quickly. But I do think, too, we need to put a lid on our expectations for this, and exactly what Tataragami UA, who I'd love to interview at some point. I've reached out through a means, I think, but if anyone can get me in touch, I'd love to just a couple of hours talk. He can say whatever he wants. It won't be edited. Please let me know. He can have final check too if he wants, but nothing will be cut out. Permission to strike with ATACMS came as timely as it did in October 2023 when the counteroffensive was essentially over. Don't expect a major shift on the battlefield with their use, as the nature of the setbacks for the Ukrainian army comes from different issues. And he talks a lot about manpower, command issues as well. But we're going to look at what he does, because he does a fantastic breakdown at length on this. Let's look at what Zelensky has said. The plan for strengthening Ukraine is the victory plan that I presented to our partners. One of the main points is the long-range capability of our army. So he talked about long range, but this isn't where I believe he was talking about. I believe he wanted the Tomahawk missiles with range far beyond, because the ATACMS are not going to reach where a lot of the assets Ukraine needs to take out. None of those TU bombers, none of those Su-34s are even close to within range of these ATACMS. So let's have a look at the original Times article that came out about this. Biden allows Ukraine to strike Russia with long-range US missiles, of course, the ATACMS. President Biden has authorized the use of these missiles inside of Russia. The weapons are most likely to be initially employed against Russian and North Korean troops in a defense of Ukrainian forces in the Kursk region of Western Russia. Mr. Biden's decision is a major change in US policy. The choice has divided his advisors. The shift comes 2 months before President-elect Donald Trump takes office. Many are saying this is just to make that very difficult for Trump. Allowing Ukrainians to use long-range missiles, known as the ATACMS, came in response to Russia's surprise decision to bring North Korean troops into the fight. Why now? Would have been far more useful a year or more ago. Exactly what I've been saying. I believe the narrative, the idea of North Korean soldiers in the battlefield benefits Ukraine more than Russia. There is no evidence beyond someone with a flag in their bio releasing a photograph of someone or a video of someone who looks Asian. There is no evidence beyond that North Korean soldiers have entered the battlefield, and every single thing on the battlefield is filmed. I served with Asian blokes in the Australian Army. You can't just now go, everyone who's Asian is in this war is now a North Korean. Look at where Russia covers in the globe. Plenty of people within there look Asian as well, have signed up. So they have not seen evidence yet that North Korea has entered the battlefield. And it seems like some are saying they have, they're about to, some aren't. What I'm saying is, if the narrative of North Koreans have entered and has got then this policy signed off, exactly what I said earlier, 10,000 troops who don't speak Russian, who have no experience, is not going to add that much. But if Ukraine can sell that these guys are coming in a third party, and Ukraine now has permission for the ATACMS, the idea of North Koreans entering the battlefield has potentially, to this point right now, benefited Ukraine more than those soldiers with no experience would benefit Russia. That's why I believe we're seeing Russia talk very little about North Koreans and Ukraine talking about it as much as possible. President Volodymyr Zelensky of Ukraine did not confirm the permission to strike, but suggested on Sunday that the more important than lifting restrictions would be the number of missiles used to strike the Russians. So how many are going to be available today? Today, many in the media are talking about the fact that we have received permission to take appropriate actions. But blows are not inflicted with words. Such things are not announced. The rockets will speak for themselves. We do know that Zelensky has been saying a lot that sometimes not even half of what was promised is being delivered. Now, of course, HIMARS have been used across the border, but not the much longer range ATACMS. Now, one of the big reasons for this is one, GPS, because Ukraine doesn't, of course, have its own satellites, so it's really a US-based system using all US-based information, but also the terrain tracking capability of some of these systems too needs to be all in-house as well. Apparently, there's a lot of that to do with Taurus. While the officials said they do not expect the shift to fundamentally alter the course of the war. One of the goals of the policy change is to send a message to the North Koreans that their forces are vulnerable and they should not send more of them. So again, if we never see North Korean soldiers turn up, it'll be sold as, well, the ATACMS threat worked, so send more or more long-range strikes. I'm still not convinced that we're ever going to see real confirmation that North Koreans have entered the battlefield. I don't see why that is fundamental for Russia at the moment to need another 10,000 when they're recruiting 1,000 Russians a day. I don't know. The officials said that while the Ukrainians were likely to use the missiles first against Russian and North Korean troops that threaten Ukrainian forces in Kursk, Mr. Biden could authorise them to use weapons elsewhere. So it sounds like there's still some restrictions on these, but that it's not going to shift fundamentally the course of the war. What I would ask back to these officials then is, well, what is the course of the war? It's not going to shift it. What is the course? Allowing long-range strikes on Russian territory using American missiles could change that equation. Now, I don't think it's going to change the equation at this point, unless it was massive numbers and not just ATACMS. In August, the Ukrainians launched their own cross-border assault into the Kursk region, where they seized a swath of Russian territory. Since then, US officials have become increasingly concerned about the state of the Ukrainian army, which has been stretched thin by simultaneous Russian assaults in the east, Kharkiv, and now Kursk. The alleged introduction of more than 10,000 North Korean troops. Mr. Biden's response came as Mr. Trump prepares to re-enter office with the stated goal of ending the war. Trump has said little about how he would settle the conflict, but J.D. Vance has outlined a plan that would allow the Russians to keep the Ukrainian territory that their forces have seized. The Ukrainians hope that they would be able to trade any Russian territory they hold in Kursk for Ukrainian territory held by Russia in any future negotiations. What I say is, though, realistically, what's being held in Kursk is somewhere between 400 and 600 square kilometres. I've just put here 550 for the sake of it, compared to it's about 111,000 square kilometres that Russia holds. Again, it's going to be irrelevant for if there's a 1-to-1, even up to 5-to-1, and there is specific elements of ground that is way more important than Kursk. You're not going to get the piece of 400, 500, 600 square kilometres occupied in Kursk. You're not going to swap that for Sevastopol. That's not happening. If the Russian assault on Ukrainian forces in Kursk succeeds, Kiev could end up having little to no Russian territory to offer Moscow in a trade. Again, I think that the numbers comparison at the moment is fairly similar. Russia could just go, we'll give you back Kharkiv, which is a similar amount to in Kursk. Anyway, the British and French militaries have given Ukrainians a limited number of Storm Shadow's scalp. Every time I go to write and do this, I go to put SS as like a short language for Storm Shadow, and then I'm like, I can't type that on here, which have a range of about 155 miles, less than the American missile system, and we presume in much smaller quantities too. British and French leaders have voiced support. It does look like they will go through by what we shared before, but they were not willing to sign off on those unless the US also said yes. Mr. Putin could respond to the use of long-range ATACMS on Russian soil by directing the Russian military or its spy agencies to retaliate, potentially with lethal force against US and European allies, or by further arming North Korea, Iran, or some of the technology that China is after from the Russian forces. Also, this is what I have said about escalation. Escalation does not mean, like a lot of people on the pro-Russian or pro-Ukraine side, he's going to drop a bomb. No, Russia doesn't need to escalate that way. They can go, that's great. We're going to give signals that we're going to start nuclear arming Iran, North Korea due to your decision here, that could really swing things one way or another. The assessment warned several possible Russian responses that included stepped up attacks of arson, sabotaging, targeting facilities in Europe, as well as potential lethal attacks on US and military bases. And these won't be lethal attacks on US or European military bases by Russia. It will be by Russian-backed proxies, say, wherever. That can definitely occur. We saw that with Ukraine in what was the country? But a country in the Sahel Alliance in Africa striking Wagner PMC troops as well. And we have seen that the FSB SVR has very likely, it's not going to be official, been very active in Europe with arson attacks against some of these facilities. I've gone over that with some information over the past couple of months anyway. Biden was persuaded to make the change part in the sheer audacity of Russia's decision to throw North Korean troops at Ukrainian lines. But why would Biden care about escalation now? He doesn't. That escalation is going to go on to Trump to try and fix things. But at the end of the day, the North Korean soldiers who are deploying into Kursk is still in Russian territory. And it's a weird thought experiment. I talked about this on the initial days of the Kursk occupation pushing up in. What would happen if Russia dropped a bomb there on their own territory? How would that actually be seen? And this is, like I've said, in international relations, North Koreans working on Russian territory there is going to be seen as far different than if it was on occupied territory. Just like if the West deployed into Ukraine, it would be seen way different on occupied territory by Russia than across into Kursk by the international community as a whole. Like we have spoken about, if Russia has got 50,000 guys, I'll show you on the map, up in here in Kursk, ready to push this back, that people have said the Russians may continue into Sumy, but the North Koreans may stop at the border if they are there at all. Here we go. He was also swayed, they said, by concerns that the Russian assault force would be able to overwhelm Ukrainian troops in Kursk if they were not allowed to defend themselves with long-range weapons. US officials said they do not believe that decision will change the course of the war. Again, what is the course of the war then? Because the actions being made seem to say the same as the frontline situation, but publicly it's not lining up. That's where you sort of have this reality and what the media and officials are saying. But they said Mr. Biden determined that the potential benefits, Ukraine will be able to reach certain high-value targets that would not otherwise be able to do so. The United States will be able to send a message to North Korea and will pay a significant price for its involvement, outweighed the escalation risks. Mr. Biden agreed to supply several hundred long-range ATACMS to the Ukrainians for use on Ukraine's sovereign territory, included then the Crimean Peninsula, that's supplemented by more supplies of Storm Shadow and Scalp missiles received from Britain and France over then the war. The Ukrainians since have used many of those missiles in a concerted campaign of strikes against Russian military targets in Crimea and the Black Sea. But we have seen that dramatically absolute fall off the face of the earth of those actually taking place anymore. Though we haven't seen those fired for a long time, I do have questions about how many of these are left or are being made. As a result, it is unclear how many of the missiles the Ukrainians have left in their arsenal to use in the Kursk region. Again, we have no idea. So let's look at what Tatarigami UA has said about this. Early reports suggest that Ukraine's use of ATACMS may come with specific geographic limitations, and nuance might significantly influence the outcomes for their use. Here's a breakdown of what to expect. So in number 2 here, as reported by our team on Frontline, Front Intelligence Insight, Russian forces have moved away their key assets beyond ATACMS range, leaving mainly helicopters and close support jets at the Kursk airfield within striking distance, reducing high-value targets. So things like your Kar-52s, things like your Su-25s, potentially, but you're not going to reach these longer things like your Su-34s or your Tu-22s, 160s, 95s. And this is why we have seen the Americans say so far that it's sort of irrelevant for these strikes. That's why we're not signing it off, but now it has reached the threshold to be signed off, I guess. He says Russia has a vast network of makeshift ammo depots, command posts, rail stations, and other tactical sites in Kursk Oblast. However, their sheer number far outstrips the limited missiles available to Ukraine. So yes, there's a lot of targets in here, but how many missiles are going to be is not going to be able to hit every one of these. Again, we will see. Russia has a hell of a lot of open air depots of ammo from Soviet Union through to recent times that we have seen struck, but hasn't seemed to have an effect on the amount of artillery or weapons or missiles used in the war itself. We saw those massive explosions, but has there been a measurable artillery decrease? Not really. Ukraine faces difficulties with limited salvo size and significant ATACMS interception rates. This is what you forget about. The longer these are used, the higher the interception rate by air defence will be, just like Kalibas getting hit by, say, Patriot. Reducing the odds of consistently successful strikes. Our team has detailed these dynamics in dedicated report before, and they have also been factored into expectations. So I think there needs to be a lid put on expectations of this. I think there needs to be a lid put on the expectations that Putin's going to drop a nuke by the Russian pages, and a expectations decrease too, that then this is going to see Ukraine end up in Moscow. ATACMS variants differ in range and warhead type. Not all can reach that 300 kilometres or target fortified structures, so it does limit options. Quite serious doubts remain over whether Ukraine will be allowed to target Russian oil refineries or energy infrastructure. The US has opposed similar operations before. While this remains speculative, there is a good chance the critical infrastructure might be excluded. That said, you're only going to have a short time period too if Trump does want to negotiate an end to the war. ATACMS will aid Ukraine on the battlefield without a doubt, but expectations should be tempered. Their use is unlikely to dramatically impact Russian or North Korean linked forces in Kursk, delivering some incremental tactical gains rather than immediate and decisive outcomes. That is the thing. These weapons are always used at a strategic level, not that frontline infantry level. Yes, it helps it, but battles are won and lost at the very front by tactical units like the infantry, armoured, and you could put into artillery as well. The goal is not to discourage public sentiment, but to set a realistic expectation to avoid future speculation about why ATACMS didn't shift the war's tide or destroy North Korean forces in the Kursk Oblast. So temper expectations here, I think, both ways. Let's look at what Surex says. It seems that today the Ukrainian government received a green light from the US for the use of long-range missile systems on Russian territory. The reason behind the decision are reportedly related to the Russian general advance on the entire front, the maintenance of the Kursk area, and the arrival of North Korean soldiers. Their presence remains unverified. The decision is yet another step in the escalation of the conflict. There is no doubt the Ukrainian armed forces will begin attacks deep into Russian territory from now on. However, do not expect a Russian response in the form of an attack on any Western country. This is currently ruled out and does not go beyond the threats and rhetoric from the Russian government. Again, the threats and rhetoric, whatever, is ATACMS enough of a step for then a strike here or a atomic bomb, a nuclear weapon here? No, absolutely not. The use of long-range missiles will increase Russian casualties, just as HIMARS did in 22. However, it is a factor that will not condition the development of the war. In fact, it will be Ukraine that suffer the most from this decision, as an escalation of large-scale Russian attacks is expected, especially on the launching stations of these missiles on Ukrainian territory. In the meantime, the war of attrition will continue, with Russia slowly but inexorably moving up the battlefield towards the Dnieper. And many people are saying that Russia will move more and more towards the Dnieper River. I don't know, but again, like with this, time will tell, and a lot of people will look very silly, regardless how this war ends, whether a Ukrainian victory or the Russian victory, whether somewhere in the middle, like we've seen JD Vance speculate. There's going to be a lot of people look incredibly silly out of this. Now, of course, we have Ukraine in the center of your screen, the capital of Kyiv, the red areas, occupied since 22, the purple since 2004. Now, we don't have that many updates on this map today, but there are a few very interesting ones to look at. So let's come down into the hottest front, this Kursk area, and we can see where Russian troops have moved through Dalny. Now, there is geolocations right out in here also, and how they have moved further to the north of Kursk through Beretsky. Also, there are some reconnaissance elements that were targeted by drones well out in this area also, and further push out from Novoselidivskaya as well, again pushing on this front and having more effects around here. We don't see any changes around Trudovo, Maximivka, but this is all very important areas too, and there definitely are some areas shifting in here. So let's have a look first at Maximivka. So as you can see, just out from right in here, right where my cursor is there, out from grey zone, there has been an attack by Ukrainian forces on Russian positions here. These are Ukrainian forces being dropped off by a protected mobility vehicle here and then fighting into Russian positions as well. So we do know there are Russian positions right up in right where my cursor is right here as well. So that front line has definitely shifted. Now let's have a look then at Tredove. So just to the east of here is Tredove. We can see where that grey zone is, and we can see today right to the edge of this reservoir, so just in here, that Russian forces have been fighting in and around Tredove. In this footage here, we do see a number of Russian armoured convoys as well as strikes. And then I believe at 1:55, if my memory serves me correctly, yes, we do see Russian soldiers here putting up then a Russian flag in that geolocation just on Tredove there, as this front line does continue moving. Now we talk about in Beretsky here, just setting the tone of what this whole sort of front line is, and further Russian advancements. This one here then can be confirmed, but this is what I wanted to look at. Now I wish I could draw on the scribble maps on my app, but I cannot. So this is the area we're looking at, Tredove, Maksimivka area. Now the blue arrows in here is the direction of which the fortifications are then meant to be sighted in for a level of attack. So you can see this fortification of here is facing south for a northern advancement. This is why Russia has had a lot of success here around Dalny, is these fortifications' effectiveness has been reduced by them attacking to the west. But this is where I want to look at as well, around Stary Turny. Of course, this is where that dam was blown up, and it has flooded out here by the blue that I have given. Now, we don't know how bad the flooding is. This N15 road still seems passable. But I wanted to look at these fortifications too, because these, because of the ground sloping down from Andrivka, are facing from a northern attack. Now, this is showing where the Russian forces are trying to potentially outflank Kursk on the north side or get fire control, or potentially where the Russians out from Novomedrivka and Zoroya, where we have seen movements, are trying to push to the west to cut off some of these main roads. Because if this has been blown up and is flooding, and this road between Constantinople and Andrivka is cut off or impassable by the water, if Russia can get to this road, it will greatly affect the logistics into these defensive lines that are on top of the hill, defending north, not over Andrivka. There's also some critical intersections like this one out of here that supply some of these main artery roads. We've also seen an increase in Sukhayali down here of fabs being dropped on where some of these other then roads pass into areas like Antonivka, Katanivka down in this forming salient. So it is interesting to see where Russia is trying to bypass those fortifications and by reducing their effectiveness and not coming straight into them. But if Russia do have a zap push, which is just going to have to be dead north, I'm not sure how that is going to look without significant, massive casualties. So let's move our way down, and we have, of course, Otokiv, Robotny, where some are expecting a Russian push. Now, let's open up our Syriac map right in here, and we can see, if we move this across, we see where Novo Pokrovka is. We also see where this funny shaped paddock is. This is this funny shaped paddock. So it's saying, if you track where my cursor is, right out along in this area here has been taken by the Russian forces. Again, I don't have any hopes to see any updates on Robotny for maybe 6 or more months. Now, we come up into then Chasiv Yar. Now, it is showing Russian forces had an advancement in Chasiv Yar, but again, we saw those troops working right where my cursor is in here the other day. Maybe a reconnaissance element, probably should just be grey, but showing that there is an advancement here. But we have a couple of updates. We have one to the north around Herovkia, showing where Russia has advanced, but also where a map correction was made showing where the Ukrainians are still in Herovkia itself. So to the north areas, you take where this tree line is, that the Russians are up to here by Syriac, as well down on the flanks, having further on the west and eastern side of Horovka, but saying that the correction was made in the center, that Ukrainian forces are still present. Now, to the south around Klishkivka and Rivkia as well, we see another update here. Ukrainian army continue launching counterattacks south of the city and managed to recapture mine number 9 and positions along the H32 road. So this isn't the easiest thing to show, and this doesn't show it as grey zone at any point either. So let me move the map just like this for you. So this area down in here, where my cursor is this part of grey zone, and then this is the same mines across this road in here. still shown as grey zone. So if Russia did take these areas and Ukraine took it back, because it never showed that Russian advancement, it can't show the Ukrainian counter attacks on this map. Now, there's the end of the updates for Deep State, but Nevsky up in here, it is said that there is a Russian advancement just north of here. So we have Nevsky, we'll follow this road up. The easiest place to look where this tree line is here, along with the end of these paddocks, saying the Russian forces are right up to this tree line to the north of Nevsky, taking an area in here. Again, don't know. Still shows then the grey zone being pushed into Kupiansk, so that hasn't decreased there, and I won't share it with you, but the UK's MOD update does talk about, because the Russians were able to then meet the Oskil in here and cut this into the north and south element, which we spoke about for months, that the Russians get to here, logistics into Pishani, logistics into Lazova are going to become very difficult, hence we've seen this update very quickly in some areas, but also that fighting in Kupiansk is continuing and increasing, so we will wait and see there. No changes in Kursk either. Legends, have a fantastic day, and I'll speak to you tomorrow. Thank you. Bye-bye.